Damien Cross was a man who had everything the world envied but almost nothing he truly cherished. The newspapers called him the Steel King, a billionaire who had reshaped skylines with his luxury towers and glass-walled empires. His name opened doors, his money silenced critics, and his power bent people to his will. Yet inside his mansion, a fortress of polished marble and cold elegance, there was always a silence so heavy it pressed on his chest. The silence wasn't just metaphorical. His 6-year-old twins, Ella and Ethan, were both born deaf. Damien had spent millions consulting specialists across continents, chasing experimental surgeries, and hiring the best therapists. But still, his children lived in a quiet world of their own. And though he loved them, he felt like a visitor, peering into a place he couldn't enter. They giggled in gestures, laughed in movements, communicated in expressions, but when he tried to connect, his efforts always seemed awkward, foreign, even clumsy. Every evening, after long hours at his office tower, Damien returned to the mansion to find his children either asleep or in the company of their caretakers. He wanted to be the father who made them laugh, who brought light into their world, but instead he had become the stranger they smiled at politely and left behind. He told himself he was doing his best, that giving them security, comfort, and opportunity was enough. Still, the guilt gnawed at him in quiet moments. On one such evening, fate twisted his routine. Damien arrived home earlier than usual, his car gliding silently up the long driveway. The house was unusually alive, and not with sound, but with movement. He stepped inside, loosened his tie, and walked through the hallways, his footsteps echoing against marble floors. Somewhere deep within the house, he felt and heard something strange. The floor beneath him seemed to hum faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Curious, Damien followed it, down the wide staircase, past the dining hall, toward the kitchen. The closer he got, the stronger the vibration against the soles of his shoes. He paused at the doorway, and the sight that met him froze him in place. There, barefoot on the gleaming white tiles, was Lucia, the maid he had barely noticed beyond polite greetings. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair tied messily into a bun and eyes that sparkled with mischief and warmth. She wasn't scrubbing or cleaning. She was dancing, and not alone. His twins, Ella and Ethan, were dancing with her. Lucia had placed a Bluetooth speaker against the stainless steel counter, and though Damien could not hear the song, he realized what she had done. The metal vibrated with the music, carrying rhythm into the floor and counters. Ella and Ethan had their hands pressed against it, their small bodies swaying in the light. They weren't just moving randomly, they were feeling the music. Ella's curls bounced as she spun in a wobbly circle, her little face glowing with laughter. Ethan stomped his feet to the beat, his eyes wide with the kind of joy Damien had never seen in them before. They'll cut a broken bar alive, free. And at the center of it all, Lucia twirled gracefully, clapping her hands in rhythm, bending down to encourage them, her face lit with laughter that Damien could almost hear through the silence. She wasn't treating them as fragile children needing pity, she was showing them a world they could touch, a world they could dance inside. Damien's throat tightened. He leaned against the doorway, watching, almost afraid to break the spell. He realized, with a pang, that he had never seen his children like this, not once. And all it took was a maid with no wealth, no power, just courage and creativity. The twins soon spotted him. Ella froze mid-spin, pointing at her father with wide eyes. Ethan tugged at Lucia's dress, signing quickly with his small hands. Lucia turned, startled, her face draining of color. "Mr. Cross," she stammered, pulling the speaker away, as if she had been caught committing a crime. The music stopped, the vibrations ceased, and silence reclaimed the room. Ella and Ethan's joyful expressions faded into disappointment, their little shoulders slumping. Damien stepped forward slowly. The air between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fear. Lucia fidgeted with her apron, her eyes darting to the floor. "Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have a broken bar," she began, her voice trembling. "It was just a broken bar." They were restless, and I thought maybe. "Maybe what?" Damien's voice was low, almost sharp. not because he was angry but because his emotions were clashing violently inside him. Lucia swallowed hard. Maybe they could feel music instead of just watching it. I thought it might make them happy. Damien looked at his twins. They were staring at him, their eyes pleading silently, hoping he wouldn't take this away from them. He felt his heart squeeze. He wanted to speak, but words tangled in his throat. For a man who commanded boardrooms with speeches that moved millions, he couldn't string together a single sentence for his children. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He grabbed Damien's hand and pulled him toward the counter. With his other hand, he guided his father's palm onto the cool stainless steel. The speaker was still faintly buzzing with residual vibration. Damien stood there, frozen, and for the first time in his life, he felt music without hearing it. The hum traveled up his arm, steady, rhythmic, alive. Ella pressed her tiny hand next to his, grinning, urging him to understand. Then both children began to move again, stopping, swaying, pulling at his hands to join them. And Damien did something he hadn't done in decades. He laughed. It was awkward, shaky, almost foreign on his lips, but it came. He bent down, shuffled his feet clumsily, and allowed himself to move with them. His expensive shoes squeaked against the marble, but his children didn't care. They were delighted. Their laughter silent but so expressive it was contagious. Lucia stood off to the side, stunned, her hand covering her mouth. For a moment she thought she would be fired instantly, but instead, she saw something extraordinary. The billionaire who wore a mask of steel and authority every day was now just a father, stumbling and dancing barefoot in a kitchen, finally entering the world of his children. As they whirled around him, Damien felt tears sting his eyes. He realized this was the first time in 6 years he had truly connected with Ella and Ethan. Not through doctors, not through money, not through structured therapy, but through vibration, movement, and love. When the song ended, the twins collapsed into fits of laughter on the floor, their cheeks red, their energy spent. Damien looked at them, then at Lucia. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Don't ever stop," he whispered. Lucia blinked, shocked. "Sir, whatever this is a broken bar, keep doing it," he said, his gaze locked on his children. They've never been this happy. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by marble and silence, Damien Cross, a billionaire, empire builder, power broker, had discovered something priceless, a language of love he had never known existed. That night, Damien lay in his vast bedroom, unable to sleep. The house was silent again, but his mind was still humming with the rhythm he had felt in the kitchen. He replayed the sight of Ella whirling, Ethan stopping, their faces glowing with laughter. For 6 years, he had thought their world was unreachable. Yet in a single evening, a maid had bridged that gulf with nothing but imagination and heart. He stared at the ceiling, guilt gnawing at him. How had he missed it? He had thrown money at doctors and specialists, desperate to fix what he thought was broken. But his children had never needed fixing. They had needed connection. And he had been too blind, too consumed by his empire, to see it. The next morning, he called for Lucia. She entered cautiously, her hands folded nervously in front of her apron. Her eyes were wary, as if she still expected punishment. Damien studied her in silence for a long moment. She wasn't highly educated, she wasn't polished like the tutors he hired, yet she had succeeded where they had all failed. "Teach me," he said finally. Lucia blinked. "Teach you a broken bar or what, sir?" "Whatever it is you did with them," Damien replied. His tone was firm, but his eyes softened. "Teach me how to reach my children." For the first time, Lucia's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "Yes, sir." From that day on, the mansion changed. Every evening, instead of retreating to his study with endless contracts and calls, Damien went straight to the kitchen. The marble floors that once echoed only with the quiet shuffle of staff's footsteps now pulsed with life. Lucia brought the speaker again, placed it against the counter, and encouraged the children to dance. This time, Damien joined willingly. At first, his movements were stiff, awkward. His billion-dollar suits didn't suit stomping and whirling. But Ella and Ethan didn't care. To them, every clumsy step he took was a victory. They laughed harder when he stumbled, their faces lighting up at the sight of their father lowering himself to their world. Slowly, he began leaving his shoes behind, rolling up his sleeves, and even laughing with theatrical laughter that shook off years of restraint. The more he danced, the more he began to understand. The vibrations weren't just a substitute for sound, they were a bridge. He watched how the twins felt the rhythm with their palms, how their bodies instinctively caught patterns, how they communicated joy through movement, and he started to see music not as something you hear but something you experience. One evening, after a particularly energetic dance, Damien sat at the counter, catching his breath. He noticed Lucia guiding the twins' hands into certain shapes as they rested. It wasn't Trandoma, it was sign language. Ella and Ethan were signing words to her, their little fingers moving with practiced familiarity. Damien felt a sting of shame. He, their father, had never learned this, yet the maid standing before him had taken the time to study their language. "You a broken bar you can sign?" he asked quietly. Lucia nodded. "I've been practicing for months." They needed someone who could understand them. "I thought a broken bar if I could learn. Maybe they'd feel less alone." The weight of her words crushed him. He had hired countless professionals, but it was Lucia, with her humble background and genuine heart, who had seen what his children truly needed. Not therapy, but understanding. "Teach me this too," Damien said, his voice rough. Lucia hesitated, then nodded. And so, their evenings expanded. After dancing, she began teaching him simple signs. Happy, sad, love. The first time Damien signed "I love you" to Ella and Ethan, their faces lit up so brightly that tears blurred his vision. They jumped into his arms, covering his face with kisses. For the first time, they had heard their father's heart without sound. Word of the changes in the mansion spread quietly among the staff. They watched, stunned, as the once distant billionaire softened before their eyes. The kitchen became the heart of the home, not the grand dining hall or Damien's office. Even the chef would pause sometimes, smiling as he watched them dance across the marble. But it wasn't just the children who changed. Damien himself transformed. Board meetings began ending earlier. Contracts waited until after bedtime. He started coming home before sunset just to see his twins' eager faces waiting at the kitchen doorway. He laughed more in weeks than he had in years. He even found himself listening when Lucia offered suggestions about the children's care. One evening, while the twins were drawing at the table, Damien lingered beside Lucia. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "You could have just kept your head down, cleaned, and collected your wages. Why risk so much for them?" Lucia looked at him, her eyes warm but steady. "Because they deserve more than walls of silence. They deserve joy. And joy doesn't cost money, it costs heart. I couldn't give them your fortune, Mr. Cross, but I could give them this." Her words struck him harder than any corporate rival ever had. Weeks turned into months. The twins' confidence blossomed. They signed faster, laughed louder, and carried an energy that filled the mansion. Teachers noticed their progress, noting how much more engaged and expressive they had become. Damien beamed with pride whenever he saw them, marveling at how a maid had done what no specialist ever could. But the greatest moment came one evening after another dance. Exhausted, Damien collapsed on the floor with his twins, laughing breathlessly. Ethan crawled onto his chest, his small hand tugging at Damien's sleeve. He signed clumsily but clearly, "Happy now, Daddy?" Damien froze. His throat tightened. He placed his hand over Ethan's, helping him finish the sign correctly, and whispered hoarsely, "Yes, so happy." Then he pulled both children into his arms, holding them as tears slid down his cheeks. Lucia watched quietly from the counter, her eyes glistening. She didn't speak, but she knew in that moment the billionaire had found a treasure more valuable than all his wealth. Damien looked at her over the heads of his twins, gratitude shining in his eyes. "You changed everything," he murmured. From that night onward, the kitchen was no longer just a place for meals. It was a place where a billionaire learned how to be a father. A place where two deaf children discovered that their world wasn't small, but boundless. And a place where a maid's courage to dance had shaken not just marble floors but the foundations of a man's heart.